So I was around 15 or 16. I'm currently 18 now, and my mom, dad, and I were on a family trip to New York City. It was a really good trip at first. We visited the Statue of Liberty, Madison Square Garden, Times Square, etc. And for the most part, it was a normal vacation. But towards the end of our trip was when everything went to shit. It was our last day there, and we were trying to get back to the airport, so we decided to take an Uber. A couple minutes passed by, and a gray Civic pulls up to the sidewalk that we were on. I remember noticing that he had Lyft and Uber stickers on his car in multiple places, almost excessively. It kind of felt like he was trying to prove that he was our Uber. It was just a small thing, of course, but looking back, I really wish I took more concern about how sus this guy was. Moving on, we were running late, so I'm guessing my dad didn't really pay attention to the license plate, because this guy was definitely not an Uber driver. He was a lanky-looking man, wearing clothes similar to rags, and looked like he was drugged out, but at the time, nothing seemed off to us. Again, we were running late, and what happened was the least of our expectations. The ride was normal until we got to the airport. We all expected him to get off the highway and let us off, but he didn't. Instead, he casually continued down the highway past where he wanted to be dropped off. This was when my dad noticed that the man didn't have his phone set up with the Uber GPS open. We were starting to get worried, so my dad asked him in a very stern voice, "Excuse me, where are we going?" The man stayed silent. Flustered, he asked once more, this time yelling, "Hey man, what's going on?" Again, no reply, but at this point, the man started dashing down the highway, weaving past other cars, and just driving very dangerously. We were all panicking, and with my dad now screaming at him to let us off, my mother was crying and praying with her rosary clutched firmly in her fist, and I was just in shock. I froze up. I couldn't even cry or scream as much as I desperately wanted to. I was completely immobilized. This continued for a while, driving down an unfamiliar road to God knows where, with the car only getting faster and faster. I started having those classic end of the road type thoughts like, holy shit, this might be it, and there's nothing I can do about it. But luckily we were saved. I don't know if we passed by it or if someone in a car we had passed called the cops, but soon we had heard sirens blaring behind us and we were being tailed at high speeds by multiple police cars. One of the cops had a megaphone or something to amplify their voice, and the officer screamed out for the man to pull over. Obviously, he put up a fight, and the police had to actually cut him off for him to finally stop. The police helped us out of the car and got all of our things from the trunk while putting blankets around us and telling us that it was going to be okay and that we were all safe now. At this moment, I felt the biggest wave of relief wash over me that I've ever felt in my life. Don't get me wrong, it still fucked with me and my family very hard, and I was still left pretty traumatized by it, but I was at least glad that me and my family were alive and safe. The police gave us a ride back to the airport, and everything went as planned from that point on. But holy shit, I'm just glad that I never had to find out what this guy was doing or where he was taking us, and what he was planning on doing with us. Just thinking about it gives me goosebumps. I guess the moral of the story for me is to always check the license plate before going into an Uber or a Lyft. That feature on the app that tells you what it is exists for good reason. So a few years ago, my boyfriend's dad's family decided to get together and all chip in to rent a condo in Ontario. There was a big extended family over there that his dad never saw, because he only really got along with one of his 3 sisters. My boyfriend's mom had talked him into going though, and they let me tag along because I'd been around long enough that they liked me and even trusted me. I can't remember where everyone else had gone. I think it was to the beach for what was probably like the 3rd time that day. It was just me and my boyfriend at the condo, because we were kind of sick of the beach and we just wanted to do nothing for a little while. We were sitting outside, looking over the water, and just kind of talking about life. I had just finished reading the Harry Potter series, so I think we were just talking about that for a while. And this woman comes out of the brush besides the condo. Just for an idea here, this condo was about an acre of land maybe, and it was kind of out in the middle of nowhere. The front of the condo was probably 70 feet from a dirt road that no one ever traveled down, and there were some dense trees and brush and whatnot that surrounded the 3 sides of it. This woman comes out of the wooded area and I immediately knew something wasn't right. She was limping and she only had on 1 sandal, and frankly, she looked like shit. She was very pale and her face was gone. And she was really, really pretty, but she just looked exhausted. The thing that immediately caught my attention was her baby, who she was holding very tightly in her arms as she started to come towards us. I didn't really know what to do, but my boyfriend immediately got up and walked over to make sure she was okay. I couldn't help but think of all these awful things that might happen though. After spending so many hours hearing horror stories on YouTube, I was just terrified she'd do something. My boy is a lot more trusting than I am though, and he's always had that first instinct of what's the problem and how can I help. He's never assumed the bad in anybody. So this woman is just sobbing by the time she gets to the porch of the condo, and she looks like she's just been through a war zone. She's also shaking and hyperventilating and crying. And she's telling us that basically her boyfriend has been a drunk for a while and he's been getting worse and worse, and that he's been an overall abusive guy. He would get pissed off whenever she was focusing on the baby instead of him. And part of what pissed him off the most was that it wasn't even his kid, so he kinda didn't care about the baby at all. She told us how this time in particular, he was drunk and she was driving him home with the baby in the back seat. And he grabbed the baby's booster seat and tore it out of the car and then threw it out the window while they were driving. She got the baby out of the seat or something, I don't remember how, because as she's telling us about how he started hitting her, before she took the baby and ran, we hear this yelling, and as we turn, we see this angry dude walking up to the condo, and she starts losing it. The drunk and angry guy followed her to our condo and was starting to come up to us. He was trying to act like he wasn't pissed off at first. He was doing that, "Oh, you guys found her, thank you so much" type thing. "Baby, let's go home." But he was slurring his speech and not doing a good job of hiding just how pissed off he was. My boy has always been a pacifist. Honestly, he's even kind of a pushover. He's really non-confrontational and tries to find a way to talk about stuff and just come to an agreement before doing anything. But before I could even say anything, he's across the yard and approaching this guy. As much of a pacifist he really is, he's also huge and he's built like a football player. Around 6'3", and at the time he was about 230 pounds. I've known my boy since we were 10. At the time we were 20 and we'd been dating for just over a year. I knew him better than anyone. He's never done anything like this before, but he goes up to this guy and goes, "Not another step, dude." And he's shaking as he says it. The guy tries to walk around my boy and goes, "Oh no, it's okay, I'm just gonna take her home." And my boy steps in front of him and shakes his head. "You're drunk," he said. "So I'm gonna pretend like maybe you didn't get what I just said. Don't come any closer." It's at this point that the guy stops trying to pretend and he says something like, "You don't know what's going on. That's my girlfriend, I'm gonna take her home." And he tries rounding my boyfriend again, and one more time my boyfriend blocks him and goes, "Stop." I've never heard this tone in his voice before or since. It was kinda scary. It wasn't him. The guy tried one more time before finally my boy put his hand on his chest and pushed him back a bit, keeping his hand on the guy's chest the whole time. "I'm telling you right now, you're not going anywhere near that girl and her child. So turn the fuck around and walk away." This guy was about 5'6", maybe 5'7". So when he looked up to threaten my boyfriend, he had looked like a kid. The guy finally looks up at my boyfriend and he says something that I couldn't hear. And my boyfriend said something back. And then the guy stared at him for a moment, almost like he was deciding whether or not to do anything. My boyfriend finally pushed him away and the guy stumbled back and then started pointing at me and the girl as he was saying something. And then he started to walk away. I didn't learn till the next day, but the guy had told my boy that he had a gun and that he was coming back, and that he'd kill him and I if we stopped him again. My boyfriend's response to this changes depending on who he's telling the story to. Originally, he told me that he told the guy that he'd feed him his own teeth, which kind of made me laugh because he's such a dork and he definitely got that from a movie. And ever since then, the line he tells everyone else is, "I'll be waiting." Nonetheless, the woman was sobbing and the baby was sobbing, and I was shaking because even though he didn't throw any punches or anything, I could tell that he was ready to hurt this guy if anything else happened. We called the police and they didn't really do much of anything but to make sure everyone was breathing and take the girl to her sister's place. We didn't really hear much from her after, but I know my boyfriend sent her an email once or twice, and it seems like she's married now to someone else and had another kid last time they talked. It was a really nice trip though, despite all of this. Back when I was 16, I had a rough time with my father and his girlfriend for about a year or so. Long story that isn't really related to this, but I was trying to mend my relationship with my father because before all that, I'd always been a daddy's girl. So when I was offered to go on vacation with them along with my siblings and step-siblings, I said yes, after having thought about it long and hard for a month. We went to Turkey, and we would be living at an all-inclusive resort that was aimed at Scandinavians, so a lot of people that we could talk to. The first few days were perfectly fine. I was swimming in the sea in the pools at the resort. Only creepy thing, there was this waiter who grabbed my hand and slipped me a napkin with a message of meeting up with him. He spent the next couple of days lurking around me every time that we would go out to eat, until my father saw how uncomfortable I was, and eventually told him to buzz off. Yay for dad. But one day, my stepmother decided that we should take a girl day out and do some shopping, which meant my sister, my two stepsisters, her, and myself. If I'm being honest, I didn't really like the idea, but I decided to come along anyways. So off we went to the nearest bazaar. We spent about an hour there until we got to a small place that looked kind of sketchy, but they seemed to have some clothes that my stepsisters wanted to look at, so we went inside. I remember there were 3 men there, 2 older ones and then a young one in the beginning of his 20s. He called himself Oscar. I can only remember that because that's the name of my dog. We were seated and they brought out Turkish tea and such to make us feel at home while we were looking at dresses to try on. In the end, I was pressured into trying one on and I went to the dressing room. While I was there, Oscar came and asked if all was well. Thinking it was just good customer service, I answered that it was fine. He might have misunderstood something because he then slipped into the dressing room, and before I could do anything, he had me cornered with his hands on my cheeks and leaned in to kiss me. My body froze despite my brain telling me to scream and to punch him. It took me half a minute before I managed to pull back and tell him to stop. I pushed him out and I changed faster than I ever have. Luckily, I was wearing a dress as well, so it was easy enough. Once I got out, I asked my sister if we could leave, whispering what had just happened. She nodded and then had to force my stepmother to get her arse in gear. She was enjoying all the compliments, it seemed. Once out of there, my stepmother was scolding me for making a scene. She grabbed my arm hard and said, "Do not tell your father," before she let go and marched out of there. I didn't feel like leaving the room the rest of the vacation, and as stupid as I was, I didn't want to piss my father off, so I didn't tell him. To this day, he doesn't even know what happened. And to this day also, my stepmother is still pissed at me for ruining that vacation.